and they have a Bren gun that's armed on their Dingo armored cars. Again, these are reconnaissance vehicles that make contact. They're trying to come to the rescue of the airborne units that got wiped out. But there's usually a lead element for a larger armored force that would usually follow in behind. They're trying to lay down suppressing fire. You can see the Panther Shrek crew in the center of the field looking to try to get their weapon in order so they can try to take out these vehicles at close range. The Panther Shrek at that range in real combat would pretty much destroy about anything inside the field. Just while the 75mm PAP gun got into action and fired. The mortar's now firing and return fire as well. When the gun fires, you see that it has a large muzzle brake on the front that vents the gases off to the sides, which helps reduce the recoil on the barrel, so you can build a lighter weight superstructure. The smaller anti-tank gun that you see also behind the berm is a 50mm German that just fired. The 50mm PAP gun was replaced 37mm guns early in the war to deal with up-armored tanks. But it didn't have enough power to take out Soviet tanks, and in some cases taking out American Sherman tanks. You can see the German Second Panzer moving in. They have a Hetzer tank destroyer. It has that silhouette so it can hide behind buildings and foliage pretty easily, and it has that sloped armor to really give it a lot of protection. It was a lot easier to build a fixed guard without its turret, and also make it more stronger than a regular tank. There's a Panzer II that's also on the field too. The Panzer has a 20mm gun and also an MC-13 light machine gun, so it can lay down anti-infantry support. But this phase of the war is absolutely obsolete, but it's still in training formations to learn how to drive tanks. They're also used for local defense battalions, like against French resistance in France. Is the 88 getting into action? You can see the American armor moving up on that far right side. The reconnaissance elements got into a position that's holding just to lay down cover and fire to try to pin the Germans down, start moving up supporting infantry, and they start loading up Allied armor. The first tank that you see coming through is a M22 Locust. It's a light tank that was developed by the Americans to be dropped by airplanes, believe it or not, with paratroopers to give them sort of heavy support. It was extremely thinly armored, but it could still be airdropped. This is an original one with some replacement parts that were painstakingly put in to restore that vehicle. It's armed with a 37mm gun, and it has a coaxial 30 caliber machine gun. The one behind it that's bigger, that's a Stewart light tank. The Stewart came in several variants during the war. This is what they produced later in the war. They continued producing the vehicle even in 1945 because they needed a vehicle that was a light reconnaissance vehicle. They had horses up until the late 30s, even until like 1940-41, but the armor quickly replaced horse units in the U.S. Army just on the eve of World War II. And this is a good example of it. The 50 caliber machine gun on top of the turret was actually not meant to shoot at infantry so much. It was actually designed to shoot at aircraft that would be strafing the tanks that could damage and destroy from above. You can see that they wrapped tank tread around the turret. That was an effort to armor the armored vehicle and protect the crew that's within the turret. There's also sandbags strapped in front of it, and the sandbags were designed to also absorb kinetic energy from rounds hitting it in a tank weapon fire to try to keep it from penetrating the armored plate. You see a half-track and a six-wheel armored car on the American side. The six-wheel armored car is an M8 Greyhound, and that's armed with a 37mm cannon, 50 caliber machine gun, mainly designed to use for anti-aircraft defense. It had quite a bit of armor in the front. It was designed as a reconnaissance vehicle. The half-track behind it has a anti-tank gun mounted in the back end of it, so it could be a mobile anti-tank destroyer unit. They did this a lot to take the 57mm guns and make them much more mobile, because once you're deploying a gun like you see on the German side, where they're dug in, it was much harder to grab it, load it onto a truck, especially while you're being shot at, and be able to fall out of a position and then redeploy it somewhere. Where if it's mounted on a vehicle that's self-propelled, it's a lot easier to get it into combat. The Americans are primarily equipped with M1 Garands, semi-automatic rifles with an 8-round clip. And some of the guys with the smaller rifles, they have an M1 carbine, which is a 15-round clip. Much smaller round, but still has some stopping power at close range. There's also some troops that are carrying Thompsons, which are pretty recognizable. Thompsons are a 45mm submachine gun, often carried by the sergeants. Oh, now the anti-tank rounds are going in. They just took out the half-track. The Hetzer is still in, but looks like it might be immobilized. Immobilizing an armored vehicle, a tracked vehicle like a tank or a half-track, often means that they would abandon it, the crew, because they become sitting ducks for anti-tank fire. The Jeep that you see closest to the audience is armed with a 50 caliber machine gun, and while they're laying it down for anti-infantry, and the kit with those 150 caliber cartridges, which can penetrate those gun in positions, it was actually on an anti-aircraft mount, and they were designed so they would have some sort of anti-aircraft defense. Most of the time they're supposed to be equipped with a 30 caliber machine gun, but units also upgraded to 50 caliber so they could have a little bit more firepower to penetrate building walls and bunkers. The Germans are starting to pull back from their positions on the far back side of their trench on each side of the field. The Hetzer's taken out and it's smoking. There's still an effort by the Panzer Grenadiers to push up with the 251 half-track to try to push the Americans back and get in close with some close anti-tank weapons. With these guys that are pushing up in show center, you'll see a radio man with a backpack radio. The infantry needed a way of communicating, and by the middle of the end of the war, field communications had improved greatly in the American Army, to where they could actually call in for fire support, using maps and triangulation grids to tell the artillery that might be 2 or 3 miles back where to drop rounds. Or if they were able to have a liaison aircraft, or if they had a mobile like P-51 that might be in the area to use for close air support, they could call them into a direct fire. A lot of the American vehicles would have had marker panels on them that were bright fluorescent pink or orange, which in black and white photos, sometimes you see like a white spot or like something on the engine deck. And they would have been very brightly colored, so the Allied planes knew not to hit their own guys that were on the edge of the lines. And often with vehicles that were moving forward, so the front line would be changing constantly from what it was in the morning. Right now they're working on mopping up operations as they get the last of the resistance. In most cases, when the Germans were backed into a corner, they would usually back down and they would surrender. But that is not always the case when you had SS units that were very loyal to the Nazi cause. And instead of devoting themselves specifically to the German army and to the German people, like the army did, they would actually devote their allegiance directly to Hitler. And they were the ones who usually would hold out quite a bit longer. You can see the Germans starting to pull out of the artillery positions and the gun crew that's left from the 88 and the pack guns. They know when the gig is up and they wanted to survive the end of the war so they could see their kids and family. A lot of the Jeeps that you see out in the field is very ubiquitous to see them with the American Army. But the Willys Jeep was originally developed at the beginning of the war by a company called Bantam, which has since gone out of business. But Bantam couldn't produce them, so Willys got the contract to actually produce them, and Bantam got the conciliatory prize of producing the Jeep trailers that would tow behind the Jeep for artillery and carrying cargo. Willys also couldn't keep up with the production required for the war, so they also subcontracted with Ford. And Ford also produced massive numbers of these Jeeps during the war. But Henry Ford was a little bit upset about having build the same vehicle as Willys. So when you find Ford Jeeps, they have F-Mark script pieces, everything down to every nut, bolt, and screw. So if anything went wrong, they could say, well, you know, that was a Willys part that broke. Willys did survive after the war for some years. But the Jeep, in its configuration for the war, it was designed to be mass-produced, and the Americans looked at the idea of blowing out as much content and material as you could possibly get, and with the idea that you would take casualties and that everything is replaceable. The Jeeps were generally considered by combat data from units that were serving the front lines to maybe be service vehicles for 3 months. After that, their lifespan was considered spent because they would either be driven into the ground, damaged, or salvaged for parts. So they just produced a lot of them, figuring that they would just replace them as they got damaged. But it was amazing in the field that you could actually get 10 guys and pick these things up, and you could actually repair them in the field, often with derelict vehicles that were damaged. You'd pull the parts off that weren't, and you could drop transmissions and that in the middle of this field, and within a couple hours they could have that vehicle running again. Some of the Jeeps have a big metal stake that's sticking up in the front, and that's a wire cutter, because the Germans would stretch booby trap like heavy baling wire or fencing wire across the road. And if you're driving 30 miles an hour, if you hit that with your windshield down, which is often how they would be driving near the front lines, it would decapitate the occupants of the Jeep. So that piece is meant to cut the wire. A lot of times you'd see these at Normandy, and they were made out of German beach obstacles that they salvaged, that the Seabees were cutting up and then repurposing on their vehicles. The Germans here are going to suffer kind of the same fate that their airborne comrades on the American side were suffering, and they will be interrogated and processed and sent eventually back to the United States to POW camps, including Camp Grant right here in Rockford. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Just as a reminder, you can't go out in the field to pick up ammo on that, but some of the reenactors will bring ammunition to the crowd if somebody needs a souvenir round. There's live pyro out in the field, so that's the reason why we don't want to go out there. And they're going to be wiring the field for the second battle. Occasionally, there's also rounds that are not fired that get jammed in a weapon, or they misfire because sometimes we're using vintage military surplus ammo from even the 50s or 60s, sometimes from the war. So if you get a blank, just make sure it doesn't sound like a salt and pepper shaker. Make sure it was shot off. If the primer is not struck, that's something you want to turn into a reenactor just for safety reasons.